Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to chat with you about the books that I read in the month of February. February was actually a busy reading month for me, which is kind of surprising because my reading has definitely slowed way down in the past 6 months or so, but I've read over 1,000 pages more than what I read in January, despite February being a shorter month. I was surprised to see that in the shortest month of the year, I somehow managed to complete 12 books. Storygraph says 13, but one of those is a book that I read with my daughter for school over the course of months. I'm not going to be talking about that one here today because I don't think that it's even one that any of my viewers would be interested in. So I'm just going to stick to the books that I read on my own. As I've done in previous months, I will have the book split up into genres. So if there's a particular type of book you're not interested in, you can skip over that, or one type of book you are interested in, you can skip to that section, however you want to do that. We'll kick off with classics because that is arguably my biggest genre that I read every single month, and February is not an exception to that. February is also Feb Regency, which is the only readathon that I participated in the month of February, and I am a co-host of Feb Regency, which basically centers around reading Regency-era literature. So I did read some romantic poetry during the month of February. Mostly Blake is kind of who I centered around, but I didn't complete a volume of poetry or anything like that. The only book that I did complete is The Romance of the Forest by Anne Radcliffe. I read this with a couple of my co-hosts, Dia and Stephanie, and this is our second consecutive year reading a Radcliffe book together, and so that was really fun. This is basically typical Anne Radcliffe fare. It has a lot of the elements that you come to expect in a Radcliffe book. It's definitely very gothic, very overdramatic, very over the top, and kind of almost overwritten characters at times. It contains, bandits, and there's always a nunnery or a monastery, an abandoned kind of building that has a mysterious past that characters find themselves in, a mustache twirling kind of villain that is very over the top. And so this book definitely has all of those things, as well as a constantly fainting female lead and, kind of like a perfect male lead. It's a lot of fun for what it is, but I don't think that this is one of Anne Radcliffe's better written works for a couple of reasons. First of all, it definitely feels almost like a condensed version of some of her later works, which I feel like are better written, have characters that aren't quite as stereotypical or cardboard cutouts as Romance of the Forest. I didn't feel like that this book had particularly good character development at all. Everyone kind of just felt like they were stereotypes of the genre, as well as the fact that this book is chock full of poetry. So anytime anything happens, something good happens or something terrible happens, or we're just out in nature enjoying the scenery of the sea or the forest or wherever we happen to be in the moment, our female main character writes a sonnet and proceeds to either quote or sing it out loud every single time, even when she's by herself. And some of the poetry is shorter, but I will be totally honest and say I just started skipping over the poetry after a certain point because it would be so long. There would be a time something sad would happen and she'd sit by somewhere and just weep and then compose a sonnet and sing it. And there's one moment where she sings and she pauses in her song and someone else that she doesn't even know is there picks up the song, and I'm like, this feels like a Disney movie, this precise moment. So it was really fun for what it was. I laughed at it more than I actually enjoyed the story because I felt like her later works like Mysteries of Udolpho and The Italian have more fleshed out characters and plots that are still, kind of over the top, but feel like the twists and turns either make more sense or they're more surprising, but it was still a fun time. For my Patreon, we had actually done a group read that we split up over the course of January and February because it was a bit of a longer book, and that's Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. So this is often touted as Gaskell's most tragic and sad work, and based on what I've read so far, I would agree. During February, I read the second half of this book, and I liked it a lot better than the first half. The first half is very slow moving. We're really establishing the character of Sylvia. We're establishing the town. We're establishing her parents and these two different guys who are both interested in her and have very different personalities, very different morals, very different outlooks on life. And so there's a lot of, like I said, establishing that happens. But around the middle of the book, things start moving, and I was very unprepared for how the second half of this book was going to play out, because there are just a lot of things that I did not foresee that were very dramatic or very tragic. And I really enjoyed it, especially because I feel like this is one of those classic works of literature that has really, really fleshed out characters. Characters that at the beginning of the book you might hate them and by the end you love them, or the reverse, that you really loved them, but then they start making choices that you're just like, what in the world? Why are you doing this? Or maybe even a good person that makes one bad decision. Or, there's just a lot of nuance to these characters, and I really appreciate finding in classic literature characters that are not all good or all bad. It's actually one of the reasons why George Eliot is one of my favorite authors of all time, because she does that really well. So you get the beautiful language of Victorian era literature in addition to having characters that feel very real. I just really ended up enjoying this, and I was really surprised by that, not because I hate Gaskell or anything like that, because I don't, but the only Gaskell that I've truly loved has been Wives and Daughters, and the first half of this book I felt really meh about. I could kind of just either take it or leave it. But the second half of the book was so good, and I was really glad that I stuck with it and that I finished it, because it ended up garnering some really, really great discussion as well. For my in-person book club, we read Miss Bunkle's book by D.E. Stevenson, and this is the first one of this author's books that I have ever read. The premise of this story essentially is there's this woman named Barbara Bunkle. She writes a book based on the people that live in her town, and so it's essentially a carbon copy of her town and a lot of the dynamics in her town and the way people behave. She's just changed their names and changed the name of the town. So she gets this book published, and it gets in the hands of people in her town, and they start recognizing themselves within the pages. Because Miss Bunkle has written under a false name, no one knows that it's her who wrote this book. So they're almost on this witch hunt throughout the town to figure out who wrote the book and kind of like take them down a peg, because they're not happy with how unflatteringly most of them are portrayed. Now, when I heard the premise of this book, I thought I was going to love this book because it just sounds so funny. And there were scenes that I found to be really, really funny. But overall, I found this book to be just kind of like on the okay side. I didn't love it like I was expecting to. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I feel like there are so many characters within this town, and rather than us just staying with Miss Bunkle and her writing process and her interacting with people in the town, instead, most of the chapters kind of will follow a character from the town. And for the first probably third of the book or so, we're spending each chapter with a different person. And so that feels kind of disorienting, in addition to feeling like I don't care and haven't connected to any of these characters because I'm not spending like any real time with them. And so I think I would have rather spent the entirety of the book from Miss Bunkle's perspective observing the people, and I think I would have enjoyed that a lot more. There were definitely characters that I did really like. There were a few scenes that were absolutely hilarious, particularly one where there is a tea party in someone's home where it's basically a meeting of the minds in the town to try to figure out how they can determine who the person is who wrote this book and how they can take that person down. And so how that whole scene played out was really, really funny. So I did enjoy parts of this book, but I didn't really start enjoying it until probably the last quarter of the book or so. Up to that point, I could just really take it or leave it. The last classic that I'm going to talk about here is actually a reread, and I'm going to keep this extremely brief because it was actually my favorite book of the year last year. So I've talked about this on my channel ad nauseum, and that is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. You're probably aware that this is a dystopian book that centers around censorship and book burning, and it still has a lot of good conversation for today, particularly and how Bradbury really predicted kind of the rise of entertainment and visual media in our society. And so it's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. I reread it so soon, less than 6 months after I initially read it, because I'm getting ready to teach this to my American literature class during the month of March. So I read it in February and just kind of was able to go back through all my notes because I took copious notes when I read it the first time, just to aid me in my putting together all of my thoughts for teaching. So that was kind of nice, and I really enjoyed rereading it. I did read several middle grades during the month of February, and actually both of them were rereads, but one of them was a reread from a long time ago. I haven't reread since my childhood, and that's Rainbow Valley by Ellen Montgomery. This is book 7 in the Anne of Green Gables series, and we really don't see Anne very much in this particular book because we've moved on to more observing her children. In this particular book, you don't even spend that much time with Anne's children. You spend some, but we're very focused on a new minister who comes to this town, and he has 4 children. And so we're really following them. They do have a relationship with the Blythe children, so we do see them plenty, but I feel like the book is more centered around the Mance children and just their growing up and all of that kind of stuff. It's very lighthearted for the most part. It has a lot of really fun childhood antics that I really enjoyed, but there were elements of this that I feel like, I don't know if I can really fully talk about it without giving away the ending, but there were elements to it that I just kind of brought it down to not as enjoyable a read for me in terms of it like not being a 5-star. Still a solid 4-star, and I enjoyed my time with it, and I listened to it on audio, and it was really fun. So I read this with Stephanie. We're reading our way through the Anne of Green Gables series. We only have one left, which is really bittersweet because we've been working through this series for over a year now, and it's just been really, really fun. The other middle grade that I read is The House at Pooh Corner by A.A. Milne, which I've read many times before, and I just needed something happy that was going to make me smile, and I felt that way in December also when I reread Winnie the Pooh. And so I was just, kind of like having a rough week, and I was like, I need something happy. And then I was like, wait, I never went on to read The House at Pooh Corner. So this is the direct sequel to Winnie the Pooh, has all the same characters. Although we are introduced to Tigger, you may not know that Tigger is not in the first Winnie the Pooh book. He moves to the forest in this book. It's just delightful. It's fun. It's lighthearted. It's sweet. It makes you smile. It's wholesome. And it was exactly what I needed. I read 2 nonfiction during the month of February. The first one is a really tiny book that's also a reread, and that is Sit, Walk, Stand by Watchman Nee. This book is Watchman Nee's reflections on the book of Ephesians, and as you can see, it is very, very tiny, but man, does it pack a punch. So he basically walks through the format of Ephesians, which begins with talking about how we are sitting, resting in Christ, seated with him in the heavenlies, that whole verse in the beginning of Ephesians. And from that place of rest in Christ, we can then walk out our faith with people around us. And then the final part of the title, Stand, is then once we have been able to sit and rest in the Lord, walk out our salvation, then we can stand against the schemes of the enemy. And it's just really insightful, really good, really a great reminder to me. And again, reread it at the perfect time, but I went to a conference at the end of January, and there were people that were speaking at that conference, several people that were huge fans of Watchman Nee, and this book was brought up more than once, and so I happily picked it up in February. The other nonfiction that I read in February is Hidden Figures, and I had known about this book because I remember when the movie came out, though I never watched the movie. So basically this centers around Black women who were computers, meaning they did computations, in the space race, and basically how they are kind of the unsung heroes of that time, literally the hidden figures, the people driving a lot of the mathematical and scientific equations and breakthroughs that were happening at the time, but they weren't able to actually have the title of engineer or actually be able to become astronauts themselves. And so it really centers around how important they were to America and to the progress with the space race in particular. However, this book actually begins long before the space race and long before the civil rights movement. It actually begins during World War II, talking about how these Black women were really instrumental in a lot of the flight things that were happening, like the advances with airplanes and bombers and different things like that during World War II, and how instrumental they were in us winning and being on the winning side of World War II. There's a lot that I really enjoyed about this book, but I also really struggled with it. And I was trying to decide, is this just because I listened to this on audio? She is talking about different women, but all of them feel the same. It doesn't feel like there's really a whole lot to differentiate them, even though she talks about, like maybe their family life or how they got into mathematics or, whatever. But all of it has like a very samey quality to it. And so if you were to tell me the names of the women in this book, I couldn't tell you exactly which one of them did which thing because it all just felt kind of jumbled together. And when I read reviews of this book, I saw a lot of people saying the exact same thing, including people who did not listen to this on audio and did read it physically. So that makes me think maybe it is less of a me problem. But I did still find value in reading this book, and I'm glad I did because I feel like I learned a lot, but I also just, I don't know, it wasn't a great book. It was just a decent book. I only read one fantasy book this month, and it was Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. I was so excited to get back into the realm of the Elderlings. Took a little break for a couple of months, and I'm reading through this series with my friend Whitney. And not only are we back in the realm of the Elderlings, but we're back with Fitz, and I love Fitz. Fitz is kind of the primary character of the Farseer trilogy, and then we go to a different area with different characters in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which is the second series. And the third series, Tawny Man, we are back with Fitz and the Fool, and just so happy. Just love it so much. So I am really enjoying being back in this world. And this actually, Fool's Errand, was such a fantastic book. We are learning a lot about the different magic systems, particularly the wit, which is the ability that some people have in this world to be able to bond with animals and like mentally communicate with them. But it goes far deeper than that. There's a lot more information about that, but it's something that in this particular world is very, very frowned upon, but a lot of people do have this ability. And I feel like that is very much kind of the crux of this particular book. It was absolutely devastating, but I loved it so much. It's one of those things. Have you seen that reel on Instagram where it's talking about people saying this book devastated me, ripped me to shreds? Here, read it. And that's kind of how I feel about Robin Hobb in general, but Fool's Errand was definitely like that. This is actually my only 5-star book this month that was a new read to me. The only other 5 stars I had this month were books I'd read before. So this is far and above like my favorite book of the month. I read 2 translated books this month. The first one is The Rainfall Market, and I don't know why I can't find my copy of this right now. So we're putting it up on the screen, but I do actually own a physical copy of this. It is a story of a young girl who hears of this place where you can kind of, if you're discontent with your life, you can write into this program and they will send you a ticket to get into the rainfall market, which only happens during the rainy season. So you present your ticket at this old house and you go into this magical world where you have the ability to basically change your life. And it's really, really magical feeling. There are lots of fantastical and like mythical Korean creatures, which is really fun. I really enjoyed it. I did feel like overall, even though this book has, some maybe potentially heavier themes, it honestly felt like a middle grade book to me. Both the writing style was really simplistic, and then the plot was just like very quirky and magical and felt like it could have been a kid's book. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I actually really enjoyed that about it, but I am kind of used to more translated Asian literature having a bit of a punch to it, like emotionally, in a way that I wouldn't say, oh, this could be for kids. This is a book that I would feel completely comfortable passing off to my 13-year-old. So I definitely do feel like it skews younger in how it reads, but I don't think that's a bad thing. It was just really magical and really fun. I'm also continuing my way through Attack on Titan with my friend Christy. We read volume 24 in the month of February, and this was another one that felt just kind of okay. It kind of piggybacked off of the last one, and that we're still spending time away from our main characters that I really want to be with. But the end of this was like, oh, like I just wanted to pick up the next volume immediately. So it's still really good. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm not enjoying the series, because I am. And I'm actually enjoying the exploration of other characters other than our main characters, and kind of a world or side of humanity that we haven't really spent any time with. And so I definitely do think these volumes are valuable, but I've just been sitting here the whole time thinking, but what's going on with this person? What's going on with this person? What about this thing over there? Like, what is happening with that? And so I just really I really was wanting to go back to those things. But the end of this volume makes it clear that that's coming very, very soon. The last book that I'm going to talk about is literary fiction, and that is The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. I actually read this and vlogged it for my Patreon, because every single month I read a book recommended to me by one of them and do like a full spoiler vlog with all of my thoughts. So that was the reason that I picked this up in the month of February, but I also buddy read it with my older sister, because one time when we went book shopping, she picked up a copy for me and a copy for her so we could read it together. So it was a buddy read and a vlog. This book is very interestingly laid out in that we are following a family who lives in this huge house called the Dutch House, and we're mostly following Danny, a young boy, and then his older sister Maeve, as they're navigating growing up in this wealthy home, but that's not really fully their origin. Their parents did not grow up wealthy, and so it's kind of like wealth that their father has worked for to be able to purchase this house. And the beginning of the book, each chapter is structured in that we are sitting with Danny and Maeve in a car down the street from the Dutch House, and they're looking at the Dutch House, talking about the Dutch House, and then we flash back to scenes from their childhood. So at the beginning of the book, it's kind of unclear, like, why are they not in the Dutch House? Like, what has happened to create this space and this dysfunction that you can feel, and the bitterness of the past that continues to cling to them. And so the way that the book is formatted causes that to unravel slowly, which I actually did like that quite a bit. I felt like the writing style itself was really, really good, and I really loved the sibling dynamic between Danny and Maeve. So while I was reading this book, I was enjoying it a lot, but then once we got to the end, there were choices that the author made in terms of not fully exploring some things that I felt like were just kind of like left hanging, and then just some other things that I just kind of, once I got to the end of the book, I was scratching my head a little bit and just kind of wondering what was the point. You know, there are things that I saw in reviews of this book and even the inside flap that referred to this as like a dark fairy tale, said that the Dutch House itself was pretty much the main character, and I didn't feel either of those vibes. Like, I definitely could see that this is a book that feels very cautionary in terms of like living in the past and being unable to let go and move on, and I can see those elements there, but then there were things that happened towards the end of the book that seemed to kind of negate the point that I thought Ann Patchett had been making throughout the course of the book. And so when I finished this book, I felt really confused, because I really did enjoy it while I was reading it, but then I got to the end and I wasn't sure why we had been doing any of the things that we had been doing. So I just kind of felt confused. I had like kind of a mixed experience with this book, where it's kind of like I would totally definitely read another Ann Patchett book, but I still am trying to like totally formulate how I feel about this one. Well, those are the books that I read in the month of February. Tried to keep it relatively brief, like I said, because we had a lot of books this month. But I had I feel like kind of a little bit of a mid-reading month in terms of the books that were new to me. My rereads were all fantastic. 5 stars the first time, 5 stars again when I read them again. But I only had one book that was a 5-star that was a new book, which was Fool's Errand. And then I didn't even have a lot of 4 stars. I think only Sylvia's Lovers was the only 4-star book. The Rainfall Market came close, but I think I didn't quite put it at that 4-star level. So it was an interesting reading month, very varied with varying success as well. So if you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video, love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And I'd also love to hear what you've been reading. Have you been enjoying what you've been reading? What have you been loving lately? Tell me all the things. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.